Jesse, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Well, thanks for having me on. I well, I'm just Jesse, and about 32 years ago, I started an organization called Bond, the Brotherhood Organization of a New Destiny. And what we're doing is rebuilding the family by rebuilding the man. Um, I realized at that time, because the focus was mostly on Black people, I realized that they were really angry and out of control. And they were believing the lie that it was about slavery, it was about racism, it was about everything but what it was and what it is. And it's about family, it's about love, it's about having love in your heart and not hatred, not anger. And so I started that. And so for 32 years, we've been doing that. We have an entrepreneur program where we're teaching young people how, or people period, how to start businesses. We counsel and uh, have men's forum, ladies forums once a month, and just doing all that.
Cool. What is the inspiration? What are you trying to change?
I want to, well, I can't personally change them, but I will encourage them to take a look at the anger in their hearts, and so that they can overcome the anger. And once they overcome the anger, they will stop feeling like victims. They will start to be independent human beings again, think for themselves and do for themselves, and not blame anyone else for their lack of surviving in life. They are blaming white people and everyone else right now. And I like to see the Blacks do it the way they were before the civil rights movement, to become individual thinkers and responsible for their own life. But right now, they're so angry that they can't see how to do that.
And how do they do that?
First, they have to get to know themselves. They have to pay attention to what's going on within themselves, because the real battle is within. It's not about anyone else, but within themselves, they have we all human beings, every human being on earth have a spiritual battle going on between good and evil. And as long as they're looking outside, they're not going to see that. But once they see that this spiritual battle is happening on the inside, once they start questioning that, then they will start to change. But they would see that they need to forgive, because anyone that has anger is evil. They're evil. Anyone that has anger cannot be trusted. They are evil, and they're jealous and envious and suicidal thoughts and stress and worry and anxiety and all that. And so once they go and forgive their mothers for turning them away from their fathers, and their fathers for not being there to protect them from that anger of the mother, because mothers rebuild and recreate the children in her image. Mothers have no love; they only have anger, and so they're very jealous and insecure, and so they turn the kids away from the father because of their jealousy. So I'm encouraging them. We work with all people now, all around the world, and I'm encouraging them to look at the battle, the spiritual battle that's going on within themselves, because our battle is not a physical battle, it's a spiritual battle, a warfare between good and evil. And if you notice, people today are very angry. We have a new religion in the country now of anger instead of love.
Well, what do you mean when you say anger or anybody who's angry is evil? Like, I believe you're a Christian, right? And God was angry in the Bible, but you wouldn't call him evil, right?
Right, because God was never angry. He was able to see what was going on and dealt with it. He discerned. We as children of God have discernment. We don't have anger. Anger is the nature of the devil, and it's all ego. It's all about self. It's all ego. And once you start to examine yourself, you will see that all thoughts and all emotions are evil. All thoughts and all emotions, they build you up to let you down. They let you down to build you up, to build you up to let you down. And after a while, you want to jump off a bridge. And so all thoughts are of the devil. They are not from God. All emotions of the, except practical thoughts. Like I'm gonna build a house, right? I learned how to build a house. And when I build a house, I'm done with that. But all this other crap is the nature of the devil and not of God.
So I remember there's a few parts in the Bible where it specifically said like God was angry, like Deuteronomy 9:8, where it says, and the Lord was so angry with you that he would have destroyed you. In Psalms 56:7, because of the wickedness, God them called them forth and in anger put down the peoples. Is that like a different kind of anger? Like, what do you mean by anger? Because I don't
Um,
understand when you say anger is evil.
there is now, the Bible has been rewritten so many times over the years based on the culture, because I remember a time when they would call anger hatred, but hatred was what to the ego sound like a bad word, so they changed it to resentment, and then resentment sounded too bad, so they changed it to anger. Anger is supposed to sound nicer, but I don't know if they why they call it anger, because God is never anger. He is of love, and He never holds anything against anyone. But anger, maybe they just rewrote the Bible because it's very deceptive to human beings, because human beings will base the emotions on that of God, especially after they call themselves a Christian. They will say, well, Jesus was angry because they have identified with that nature as though it's them. And it's hard to let that nature go, that false nature go. And so they hold on to their mess, that life, thinking that it's life, but they're dying. But God and his son Christ were never angry. Perfect love casts out anger. If you notice too, anyone that has anger has fear. And God is not of fear. Greater is he that's in us than he that's in the world. So anger is also, I realized that anyone that has anger, um, they have suicidal thoughts and anxiety and so-called PDS, which is really not the name for it. And so anyone that has anger has no peace, because that nature is that of the devil.
Well, I understand anger to just be like a response, and there's certain times where it's reasonable to be angry. Like it's reasonable for the Jews to be angry at Hitler. It's reasonable for people to be angry if someone puts them in slavery. It's reasonable for people to be angry if you've been cheated or lied to or hurt in some way. I don't see anger as evil. I think it's a perfectly rational, justifiable thing. And like Jesus was angry at the tax collectors and kicked them out of the temple. I think that was perfectly reasonable. Um, is that the same kind of anger you're talking about when you say anger is evil?
You mentioned the Jew situation and slavery and all that. The one thing I can absolutely tell you for sure and without a doubt, there is never, ever, 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 but never, ever, 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 but never a time to be angry. Never. Otherwise, why would God tell us to love our enemy, but and not to hate them? Pray for those who try to that goes against you, try to get revenge or whatever, because they know not what they do. They cannot see. And so he encourages us to pray for them instead of to hate them, because they are blind and cannot see what they're doing. And so when you pray for someone, meaning, and prayer doesn't mean just pray out to God for them, but you wish them well. And wishing all people well is a prayer, because people don't see what they're doing. If they did, if they had love and can see what they're doing, they wouldn't, this world wouldn't be in the mess that it's in now. Families don't get along anymore for the most part. Um, Friends don't get along. Color, there's a battle between the races unnecessarily. And that would not be happening if the people had the perfect love of God. There's never a time to be angry at all. And you can take action. If the Jews are at war with Hitler or whomever it was, then they need to take action. Matter of fact, you take the right action when you're not angry, as opposed to when you are angry. Because when you're not angry, you can see what you're doing. But when you're angry, you really don't see the right action to take. And everything you do will be wrong. And so it's best to discern evil, but don't hate evil. discern injustice, but don't hate it. Because discernment is the light of what's going on. You can see what you're doing. You have a clear mind as to what you're doing.
Well, I understand anger actually helps in a lot of cases. Like it helps you to survive. That's why we have it is because it's evolutionarily advantageous. It helps people to survive to have anger in a
What
lot
do
of
you mean
reasons.
by survive? What in what way?
It increases your stress level, cortisol. It slows down your immune system. It speeds up your muscle and reflex times. It does a lot of things that make you faster and stronger and react quicker to inputs. It helps you to survive, like the four senses: the fight, flight, flee, and reproduce. Fighting being one of those is a good way to keep people alive. Anger is something that is helpful. I don't know what you mean when you say emotions are evil. Emotions are uh, they're just amoral. They don't have anything good or bad about them in and of themselves. They're just feelings. I don't understand why you think they're evil.
If you believe that emotions are good, why does it cause so much destruction on the person that's angry and on the people that they're attacking with the anger? If anger is good, why are people overreacting?
Well, I think anger is amoral, so it's not good or bad. It's gray because it can be good. It can be justified to be angry. Like if someone has wronged you, you're right to feel angry. You're right to want justice. But if it can also cause damage, you can be angry in wrong cases where someone you're mistaken that they have hurt you, or that you're mistaken that they've wronged you, or you're just upset because they've insulted you or something, which they have every right to use words in that way. But it can go either way. It can be both good anger or bad anger, but emotions themselves are ambiguous. They can go either way. And so I don't think they're like all anger is evil. I don't think that makes sense.
Have you, and I understand how you see it because most people identify with the anger as their themselves. They think it's them. They think that it's normal. They believe that it's normal. And whatever you believe become true to you. And once a person believes into a lie, it's impossible to convince them that they are wrong. And so you can't convince another human being that anger is evil. They have to seek for themselves to see and know that it's evil in order for them to overcome it. And every human being, not one, but every human being on this side of heaven, every human being that's born through the woman has that same problem. And only a few will seek to overcome it because they start to question themselves. Why am I so insecure? Why am I this or that? And once they start that, they'll overcome it. But most people would never do that because they have believed that it's them. They've been told that it's normal to be angry. How did you become angry?
Well, I don't think I'm always, I mean, I'm only angry in certain instances, but I don't think I'm always angry.
But when you are angry, it's always there. Either you have it or you don't have it. And so when it does come up, how did you first become angry?
I mean, like the first time ever, like when I was a little kid,
Yeah.
that was way before I could remember. I think that anger is a natural process of the brain. So it happens, the first time it happens is probably before you even have memories in your twos or threes, because you're experiencing pain and uncomfort from physical ailments, chicken pox, whatever, and those things cause you to be upset or frustrated. When you're hungry and you're not getting food, you get frustrated and angry, like when kids throw tantrums because they don't get enough food. And I think that's a good thing. It's a good thing they do that, because then the parents can look at them and like, oh, they need something. We need to give them the thing that they're missing. So it's helpful, not evil.
So you mentioned a few minutes ago that anger, when you're angry, it does something to the body. It motivates you to do this and do that, right?
Yeah.
But anger destroys the body. That's why one of the reasons so many women have cancer, because anger brings on diseases. Anger destroys every fiber of the body. It doesn't give life, it destroys life. And so it's love that gives life to the body as well. It gives you a sound mind, a clear mind. It brings peace that's everlasting no matter what you have to deal with, the situations in life. It you never take anything personal when other people are letting out their anger, expressing their anger, because why do you think? Because you're protected from it, but why do you think God said, "Overcome evil with good"?
Well, I'm an atheist. I don't believe he said that, but I think in the Bible, the reason that people adopted those kinds of principles was because the golden rule, which predates Christianity and comes from Hinduism, is a thing that many cultures identify with and they think is important, and it mirrors onto our moral framework internally. And so I think the reason that it's in the Bible and many different texts is because treating others with respect rather than evil is seen as a morally greater method than hitting them, essentially.
So you believe in the Bible that God said, I mean, that anger is good because the Bible said it. You quote some scripture about anger, you accept that, but you don't believe or accept when God said, "Overcome evil with good." Why have you
Well,
chosen to pick one but not the other?
well, no, I accept it says both, but I think,
You said you didn't believe he said that.
yeah, I don't believe God exists, so I don't think he said either. But my question earlier was about if you think anger is evil, God was angry in the Bible, so then it would seem like you're saying God is evil. But if for somebody who doesn't believe in a God, that would be perfectly fine. I wouldn't see a problem there.
Do you believe that? I'm not clear. Do you believe that God was angry?
No, I think it's a fictional story. So I think somebody wrote God was angry, but
Oh, I
he
see.
never existed.
So you say you're an atheist,
Yes,
and what is that exactly?
I believe God does not exist.
And how did you come to believe that?
By looking at the evidence, I was looking at the different arguments and evidence for what we can explain in the universe and assessing what explanations can best fit the evidence. And it seems like the God explanation more likely fits with other fictional stories in human imagination. And so it is not real. And the best explanation is the natural one in like physics.
Amazing. Did you one time believed in God or about
Yes.
him? I'm
Yes.
sorry.
Yes, I did back in high school.
And what changed your mind? Oh, let me ask
Uh,
this first. When you believe that he did exist, did that work for you?
no,
Oh, and then so by not working, you decided to believe that he didn't exist.
no. So when I was a Christian, I prayed and didn't get answers to my prayers, and so I stopped believing. But it wasn't until many years later when I started to research the evidence in philosophy that I came to believe God does not exist. That was from analyzing the different evidence and arguments about 10 years after losing faith in God.
That's amazing. What has it done for you to believe that he doesn't exist? What good has that done for you?
Um, well, it built me a career, got me a decent amount of money, a relationship, a lot of things, I guess, indirectly.
But right, you got these things that could come from the devil as well. But what good has it done you to
Like
believe
emotionally.
that? Inwardly, yes.
Um, it's given me, in a sense, a lot more peace and a lot more faith in the universe. So I think that the way I view the universe, I believe in objective morality, and it's much more elegant to view the universe as having morality as like a law rather than saying there is this being who does a lot of really bad things like drowning millions of babies in the global flood or destroying cities of people or turning them to salt or sending bears to kill children. Like for me, that caused a lot of dissonance inside of me that there's this perfectly moral being who does all these heinously evil things that didn't make sense. Whereas from my worldview now, it makes a lot more sense that morality is like a law of physics and it's not super powerful and just forces you to do whatever. And so it's seems like it makes a lot more sense that it's not this super being who just kills people.
That's
Um,
amazing. So you don't believe in good or evil?
I do. I believe in both. I'm a moral realist, so I believe morality is a real thing.
So you believe evil exists,
Yes.
but you believe good exists.
Yes.
And where does evil come from?
I think that good and evil are laws of the nature, undiscovered laws of physics.
Amazing. So when you are all alone, no one around, no cameras on you, people not praising you for being a good little atheist, and you're just all alone. How do you deal with the emptiness that you feel, and the deception of the thoughts and of the mind? How do you deal with that emptiness when you're all by yourself?
Um, well, if I'm in a relationship, I don't feel emptiness. So like I have,
Right,
I,
but when you're not in a relationship and you're all alone, the girl is not around, the TV is not on, the money is not pouring in. You know you have the money, but it's not pouring in. How do you deal with that emptiness?
I don't normally feel empty in those situations. I mostly feel like meditation. So I like to do meditation when I'm alone.
And what do you feel?
Calm.
Why do you do meditation?
Um, it's calming.
Calming from what?
Well, so like when you're in an average day going through things, you have stimulus like talking to people, playing video games, being in a relationship, and those things cause a lot of high activity in the brain. It's lots of stuff is going on, and meditation slows down the brain and it makes less stuff going on. So it's more like ripples, lots of ripples in a water, and then the meditation calms it and makes it more like flat water, and that's what's going on when you do meditation.
That's amazing. So you don't believe that you can live a life without all that stuff going on inside of you?
Oh, you definitely can. There are medical cases where we know people have certain conditions that disable their ability to feel emotion. They're called anhedonia and alexithymia. So anhedonia is the inability to feel pleasure, like physical pleasure, sexual pleasure, monetary pleasure. And alexithymia is the inability to feel emotional connection to other human beings, love, empathy, compassion, those kinds of things. And there are people who have both, where they're completely unable to feel any of those emotions. And we know there are people who get certain parts of their brain damaged and they lose all emotional capability whatsoever. So we have lots of examples of people who do actually are completely incapable of feeling emotion.
Amazing. That's amazing, man. That is really amazing. So would you date a Christian woman?
Sure.
You would date a Christian. And would you let her convert you?
Well, to convert me, I would need evidence. So I need some way to show that the God exists true, independent of our imagination. You need some way to differentiate imagination and reality. And if anybody could do that, then that would convince me Christianity was true. It wouldn't need a girlfriend for that. Just anybody who can give me evidence.
Well, I can tell you how to know for yourself. And if you try it, you will see that if you're serious about it, you will see that it works. May I tell you how?
Yeah, absolutely. If it can differentiate imagination from reality, that would definitely do it.
Doubt every thought you get about anything at any time, except practical thoughts like I got to go to work, I got to do my show. But doubt every thought, let it all pass, so that you could stay in reality rather than living in a false sense of the past or the future that doesn't exist. And if you could doubt every thought, you shall know the truth. But as long as you believe thought, you never will know the truth.
Well, actually, I like that method a lot. In fact, that's what Descartes did. He doubted everything he could down to the one thing he couldn't, which is I think, therefore I am. Cogito ergo sum. And so that's the exact same methodology I use. I doubt absolutely everything, find the core belief, which is I think, therefore I am. I can't doubt that one. That one's one I'm not very good at doubting, but everything else I doubt. And then I try to figure out a method where I can differentiate imagination from reality and then only include the ones that I can show aren't just imaginary. So I totally agree with that methodology. It's what I've been using for most of my life.
And so you said that you got that from David Kuhl.
Descartes,
Uh,
René Descartes.
who is that?
He's a old philosopher,
Uh,
many
oh,
years
okay.
ago, 17, 1800s. He famously came up with the argument cogito ergo sum, where he doubted everything and then tried to find the one thing he couldn't doubt, which was his own existence.
And how do you doubt? How do you personally doubt thoughts? What are the actions that you take?
Well, I go through a methodology and I say that there's some difference between my thoughts and reality. Like I can imagine a unicorn, but I don't see a unicorn. So that clearly there's different things. And so I need some method to test any thought I have to say, does this correspond to reality or is it just something I'm making up in my head? And in order to test if it corresponds to reality, what I do is I make novel testable predictions about the future. our imagination is very bad at predicting the future. But if we have some method that can accurately predict the future and do it very, very well and consistently, that's a good reason to believe whatever that hypothesis is corresponds to reality and not just our imagination. So the way I test thoughts is by using them to try to predict the future. And if they're good at predicting the future, that's a good reason to believe them.
Well, how can you predict a future that doesn't exist?
Um, you wait. So, like, scientists can predict that the asteroid will come every 500 years. You wait 500 years, you see the asteroid. That would be a confirmed prediction.
But how can you predict a future that doesn't exist?
The same thing. It's just
Because
not.
scientists is just doing things for the most part based on something that has already happened, which is the past, by the way, and that is physical and intellectual doing. That's practical, but you can't predict a future in your personal life when there is no such thing as a future or past. And so I'm wondering, how are you able to do that when it doesn't exist?
Well, just to clarify, so science makes predictions such as we will find a transitional fossil between a seed-bearing organism and a land-bearing organism in this exact layer in this 2 kilometer radius of this particular island, if evolution is true. And then they look there and they find it and like, oh, that's good evidence evolution was true. And they said they'll never find it in anyone below or above. It's always in this exact spot, and it's always in that spot. So they can predict things we haven't discovered yet, and then go look and see if they're there. And if they can find them, then that's a prediction that is confirmed. I can do the same thing in my relationships life. I can say, if I cheat on my girlfriend, she will be very unhappy and will probably break up with me. And I can test that. I can cheat on her and see what happens. And oh, she broke up with me. That's good evidence of my hypothesis. So I can do the same thing in relationships, usually in the positive sense, like something that'll make her happy, buy her flowers or whatever, as scientists do in the context of evolution, by predicting what we would expect to see in the future if this hypothesis was true.
So you believe in, excuse me, you believe in evolution?
Yes.
Have you ever seen a human, ape or a monkey turn into a human?
No.
And 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 do you believe that human beings came from apes?
Yes.
And why haven't anyone ever seen it if it's true?
Because it takes millions of years and no one lives that long.
And how long? When then, if it takes millions of years, how do the people who are saying that human being came from apes? How do they know if they've never seen it over
Because
the
we can
over the millions of years?
because we can see smaller things that lead to that. So, like if we see a stalactite on the ground in a cave, and we see a little drip of water coming from the ceiling, landing directly on top of the stalagmite, and we can measure, we can like catch one of the drops of water and measure the contents and say, oh, look, it contains salt, and the salt then deposits onto the stalactite, and over millions of years, it'll go from just a single drop to this large 100-meter tall just pillar of a stalactite. And we don't need to see the entire stalactite form. All we need to do is say, well, there's this smaller process which we can measure directly, which is there's this much salt in every one of those drops. And we can calculate if it kept falling for a rate of whatever, we can see that it would build this large column. The same thing applies to evolution. We can see evolution happen on the cellular level. Every person, their genes are different from their parents' genes. There are slight deviations, and which are slightly more than their grandparents or slightly more than their great great grandparents, et cetera, et cetera. And so we can measure the evolutionary rate from each individual generation, just like we can from each drop to the stalactite, and then use that to say, because there's this tiny little thing that we can see today, we can use that to infer into the past and know what happened in the past.
That's amazing. Do you realize that you have in the intellect uh, um, believe lies? It's like you're real intellectual. So, is it possible you could be wrong? And what do you think about that?
Absolutely.
So, is it possible you could be wrong that human beings came from apes?
Yes.
Oh, okay. At least you leave that possibility open.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Pretty much every scientist and philosopher believes that we don't have infallible knowledge. We have what's called fallibilism. Fallibilism is the consensus view. That means to have knowledge, you don't need 100% certainty. You only need like 90 something. It's just a percentage. And so there's always a chance we could be wrong. We could all be in the matrix and we'd never know it.
Right.
But we have good evidence that indicates one hypothesis, evolution, over the alternatives, which are less likely. So the evidence indicates evolution far, far more likely to be true than any of the alternatives, like we're in the Matrix or that created by a designer or any of those things. And so it's more reasonable to believe that we evolved from apes.
That's interesting. So your whole life, you seem young, and you still hopefully have a long life ahead of you. Um, so you believe it's okay to live this life, the rest of your life, in misery, emotional misery, because people into emotions. God is a God is a dispassionate God, and Satan is a passionate God, so-called God, right? He's not God, but he think he is. And so the people who believe in the devil think that they are too. But you are satisfied with living a life, entire life, um, in misery.
No, I would prefer a life with misery and happiness.
You prefer both.
Yes.
So then you are okay with living life in misery because there's no peace and happiness either.
Right. So I play video games. I don't know if you do, but in video games, there's challenging parts which are very frustrating and can cause you a lot of misery. But there's also rewarding parts that cause you a lot of joy and happiness. And so I would rather have experienced both rather than just be trapped into one or the other.
Really. Um, wouldn't you would not prefer to just have perfect peace at all time,
No.
which is unchangeable. It's like you would not have conflict within. You would not have a mind that leads you astray. You would have a clear mind. You will have perfect peace, and you'll be able to get things done and deal with life and just be. Life would be easy. You would not prefer that. You would rather have your conflict.
Yes, I would rather live a life where there's a diversity of experiences and you can experience anger and joy and suffering and sadness and pain and all of the positives and negatives. And you can go through transition points of going through watching a very scary movie, for example, can be very unpleasant in certain cases. But I wouldn't want to watch Kung Fu Panda 24/7. I'd want to watch Kung Fu Panda, then watch Alien, then watch Predator. And so I'd rather have the diversity of experiences rather than just watch the same movie or the same experience over and over again.
You know, when I first start hearing some people say out loud that they love their insanity, I was a little surprised that I knew that most people, if not all, most, love their insanity. And that's why they refuse to let it go. And then some people don't realize that they can overcome insanity, right? And and those that do realize it, they start to overcome it. But I was surprised when I first started hearing people say out loud, as you just did, that they love their insanity. And I totally understand it
Well, why is that insanity?
because it, it's insane to love evil because those who love evil have no peace and anger, all this fake emotion and stuff like that. And what they call depression. But anger is really hatred, and hatred separate you from God, and you find yourself judging yourself and others. And you're up. That's why I say you look for something that makes you feel good, and that doesn't last. And as soon as you're feeling good, now you're feeling depressed, worried, anxiety. Now you got to, that doesn't feel good. Now you got to find something to make yourself feel better again. And then that doesn't last. So you're up and down always in life. And that's just a horrible way to live. And we were not created to live that way.
Well, I mean, I could understand if you don't want to live that way, and that's perfectly fine. I think if you would prefer a life of perfect peace, that's great. I'm happy for you. But I think that each individual should have the right to determine their own lifestyle, and that can change over time. So, for example, some person may want to live peacefully for thousands of years, and then maybe want to experience a change and go to more chaotic state, and then go back to peacefully. And it seems like that option to be able to transition between different forms seems like a better, more moral way to live, rather than trying to say that the it's evil to prefer that way and you must prefer the peace way. It seems like the individuals that want to experience the diversity aren't in any way doing anything evil as long as they don't hurt anybody else. Like if you're hurting someone else, that's evil from my perspective. But just the experiences of emotions, anger or sadness, joy, I don't see those as evil. And I think that the desire to be temporarily happy. Like I play video games to win, so and that makes me happy. But I also play video games to lose, to be challenged. And so I'm not just looking for a high, I'm also looking for the low. I want both. And both are important aspects to the joy of playing the video game. And so I'm not just looking for one high to the next high to the next high. I want that up and down and up and down because that's the like elegance of the experience. It's not just a one tone perfect high, or I'd just take cocaine or something because then I get the one high and that's it.
Well, you're right in that every human being has a right to live a life of insanity. They have a right to stay in that insanity. But and they those who realize that insanity is wrong, they don't like that. They don't want to live that way. They are the ones that decide, you know what, this is insane. I'm tired of living in this insane world within themselves. They can overcome that. And so, but you're right. God would just let you live your insanity and die that way because He's not going to force anyone to accept life, to accept, to overcome that. So you're right that they have the right to live that way, and we have no right to judge them for living that way. They
Well,
decided that they love that insanity and they want to stay in it. Welcome aboard, right? I want to ask, if people were not angry, could they kill one another? Or
yes,
would they kill one another?
yes,
If they were not angry, they would kill, they would still kill.
yes. There are many different cases of killing for many different reasons. We know from the people I mentioned before, there are certain psychological conditions where people can't feel anger. They just don't have the emotions. There are certain very severe forms of sociopathy and psychopathy where they literally just don't see you as a human. So they're not angry at you any more than they're angry at a rock. They just see you as a rock. And so from their perspective, killing you is no different than breaking a rock because they aren't able to feel those emotions. There's other cases of killing in sadness where you kill someone to put them out of misery. You're not angry at them, you're killing them because they're suffering and you're trying to help them. Euthanasia. There are cases of killing someone out of necessity because if you don't kill them, like you have to kill one or kill five, and so you have to kill the one to save the five. And it's not anger that you're killing them; you're killing them to try and save people. So there's lots of reasons people kill that aren't anger related.
Right now in our country, you're here in America, right?
Yes.
In America, white Christian men are under attack for no reason at all, only because they hate the white Christian male, right? And they're trying to kill them. They're discriminated against them because they're white, and most people are jealous of them and envious. They're so jealous of the white man they call him superior by calling him white supremacy. They're saying that white people are superior to them, so they want to wipe them out. They're doing that in a state of anger, and they cannot see what they are doing. What do you think about that?
Right. I'm not a hardcore leftist, so I agree that the Black Lives Matter and other far leftist anarchist movements are wrong, but they're a minority. They're not the majority of people. Most people are pretty ambiguous to those kinds of claims. They're just living their lives. So I don't know when you say like America, it's not really America who's against white people. They're not really. I don't know many people trying to kill white people, but it's just a very vocal minority on Twitter and YouTube. So I wouldn't say the vast majority of people are bothered by it at all. In fact, I think that the world is getting better. The world is getting more moral, more kind, more loving, more compassionate.
Really?
Yeah, I think
So
that's
you
what the
you
data
think
indicates.
teaching children and adults so-called critical race theory, telling little children that white people are evil, that they can't help it because they are white, telling businesses not to hire white men to get, discriminate against them. In Berkeley, California, there's a dormitory or something up there that is telling white people that they can't come into the black dorm without permission from the blacks. You don't think that? What do you think about that?
I think those are all bad. I think those, but the rate at which those
Eh,
happen are very small rate. So those
Really?
aren't like common things. Yeah. So like if I compared today with all of those things to 500 years ago and slavery and mass murder, today's better. So even though there are still bad things today, it's still far better than when the life expectancy was half of what it is, when most mothers died in childbirth, when people were dying of starvation, when people couldn't, when the amount of people who could be supported by food on the planet was significantly less, when there was like Norman Borlaug invented genetically modified wheat, saved literally a billion lives. The fact that there's still bad things today, which I agree, and I think that many of the people on the left are very crazy, the level of crazy of the people on the left isn't nearly as bad as the Crusades or the witch hunts or the mass murders of the Holocaust. Today, life is a lot better than it was in the past, like ever in history.
That's amazing. So you don't see that the government of this country is outwardly discriminating against white men because of their color.
I think that people use that as a political leverage to get support of the groups that identify with that narrative. But
But they're
no, I
still
think,
using it. They're still doing it, and it's working.
well, I don't think so. I don't think in actual politics, if you go into Washington and look at the policies endorsed by Biden or whatever, the vast majority benefit white people the most. They're mostly tax benefits for the rich who are mostly white, mostly job programs and education programs that benefit white people.
But they
Cutting,
benefit blacks that are in the government as well. The blacks are doing the same thing that the liberal whites and phony right-o Republicans are doing. They're
not
getting
as
rich.
much.
They're getting rich. They use the word racism in order to pretend that they're trying to save the blacks, and they're getting rich off that because the money never goes to the blacks. So they're all promoting evil in order to divide and conquer.
Well, I agree with a lot of what you said there. You're right that they are using racism as a way to leverage financial gains for themselves, but that's not against white people, that's against black people. So they're using racism as a way to leverage support from minorities, and they use that to enrich themselves, to make rich people very, very wealthy. 90 something percent of millionaires in America are from real estate, and the vast majority of people who own real estate are white guys. And so even though they're using this as a way to manipulate the public, when you actually look at what happens to the money, it's supporting white people a lot. And so you're right that they're using the narrative to discriminate against white people, but it doesn't actually harm you when it comes to rights, or harm the white people when it comes to rights. It actually benefits them, and financially significantly.
That's amazing. You said something about slavery just now. Um, Slavery was never as bad as it is today for the blacks. Slavery uh, was better for the blacks than abortion itself. Abortion is worse than slavery. And when the blacks were enslaved, they thought for themselves. They taught themselves. They became very independent inwardly. And when slavery ended, they became individuals where they built, they had families. They didn't blame the white man. They were not complaining about slavery, that slavery was holding them back. And all the way up to the so-called civil rights movement. Matter of fact, the civil rights movement was worse than slavery. It was the worst thing that ever happened to blacks on this side of heaven, other than abortion. Uh,
Well, just
and
to clarify, do you think killing someone is worse than torturing someone and then killing them?
killing someone is worse than torturing them and then kill them.
Yeah,
I
which
don't know
one is
what you mean
worse?
exactly about it. What do you mean?
Well, so for
Give me
me,
an
like,
example of what you mean.
so like if someone you don't like and you just kill them because you don't like them, versus someone you don't like who you decide to torture them, make them work for you, make them slaves, rape them, torture them, just kill their family, and then kill them. Which one of those is worse?
It seemed, I never given it a try, but it seemed easier to just die first without the torture.
Right. So
Uh,
so when,
and you're right in that there were many blacks who owned slaves as well.
yep.
And history shows that those blacks treated their slaves worse than the white slave master did. And so that was cruelty. But what you don't realize in today's America or world, they are killing the soul of the people and not the body. And it worse it's better to kill the body than it is to kill the soul. And because what does it profit a man that he gain the world and lose his soul, right? And so the blacks, not all, the blacks have lost their soul. They have no love. They are walking dead and don't know it. And the ones who are manipulating them and using them are walking dead too. They don't realize what they're doing. They try to get power, wealth. They're trying to feel better. And they think that by controlling others, they'll feel better. And it never works. That's why they can never get enough. But the civil rights movement, blacks were individuals, independent. They weren't blaming the whites. They knew it was a battle between good and evil, right and wrong. But the so-called movement came along, and they convinced the blacks to sell themselves over to the civil rights movement. Let us be your leaders. We'll tell you how to vote. We'll tell you who to hate and who not to hate. We'll get everything for you. We'll get government programs for you. And so the blacks became groupies into their blackness rather into what is right. And
Well,
they have never been able to return from that.
do you think that slaves had a better life than African Americans today?
They had a better life in that they had love in their lives, but the blacks can get more materials today. They have more stupid stuff, right? But they're not better people than the blacks were enslaved.
Well, I would like to leave it up to the individuals, and I'd want to ask each African American, would you rather live your life as you have it today, or would you rather live as a slave in America back in the 1800s? I think the vast majority would probably pick their life today. And by that metric, I would probably say that their lives today are better. So if they have the freedom to choose, be a slave in the past or live your life as it is today, and they freely choose to live their lives as it is today, I think that it would be moral to allow them to do that, and that means that their lives today are better.
But and you're right. Most of them would say, "Oh, I prefer it today than slavery," right? Because they've been lied to about slavery. So in their imagination, because they believed a lie, once again, in their imagination, they believe that slavery, the traders of writing the history of slavery have set it up so the blacks can believe lies about slavery. And so they have this bad image of it. And so, yes, they would tell you, well, it's better to live now than live enslaved. But what they don't realize is that they're enslaved anyway. They're lost in imagination. They're being controlled. You can tell a black people that, especially if it's a white on black situation, you can tell them that was racism. And right away, they'll just believe it. They won't question it. They'll believe it, and they'll burn down America, not realizing that they are enslaved in the imagination. And that's where their enemies, which are black people, so-called black leaders and liberals and right-o Republicans, that's where they want them in order to control them.
Well, let's say that we could use a time machine and actually go back and see slavery for what it really was. None of the lies. We just get rid of all the lies.
Right.
So we could show all of the African Americans in America what slavery was really like back then, and gave them the option. They could go back and be slaves, or they could continue to live their life as it is. Which do you think they would choose?
They would go back and be slaves because they would be physically enslaved, but not spiritually, not mentally, because inwardly they would have peace, and physically they'd be subject to someone else, right? In some cases, but they would have peace of heart. They would love God with all their heart, soul, and might, and so they would be at peace, even if they're physically enslaved. Because right now they are enslaved and they have no peace at all. They have zero peace. They have nothing but anger. Their kids are angry. Their parents were angry. Their parents and the kids and the kids and the kids. That's why they are going around committing all sorts of crime and raping and murdering and killing and stealing cars, and because they have no peace. They have no love. And they weren't doing that during slavery. What the? Even prior to the civil rights movement, they were not doing those things. I grew up during the so-called Jim Crow era, During the so-called Jim Crow era, blacks were not out of control as they are today because they had love, they had family, they were doing for themselves. They had land, and they owned businesses, and they were individuals. They didn't have leaders over them telling them how to think and what to do, and they knew that the battle was a battle between good and evil, so they didn't hate white people. They knew there were bad whites and bad blacks, decent blacks and decent whites. They knew it was a spiritual thing. It wasn't until they sold themselves to the civil rights movement that all that started to change. Now you found some angry black people, W.D. Du Bois, the so-called talented 10, they were evil people and they wanted to control the blacks. And so you will find some because evil has always been around just as good. But majority of blacks had a sense of self-control. They were not blaming the whites for being losers.
Well, so if we look at the crime of African Americans today, do you think the crime of like looting and stealing cars is that worse than taking another human being and making them your slave? Because that seems to be also a crime.
Repeat that again. I'm sorry.
You mentioned that there's certain crimes African Americans commit today.
Am I right about that?
Yeah, absolutely. But to me, it seems like the crimes the white people committed by stealing the black people and making them slaves were also crimes, pretty bad crimes. That's a crime, I think.
But the white people didn't steal the black people, made them slaves. The
Black kings of Africa sold them and captured them and sold them.
Yeah, but they were captured by black was sold to the Arabs.
Yeah.
And then the Arabs went around the world selling blacks to different countries. And so just as white people bought some slaves when they came, so did blacks. And so
that was a crime too, right?
So what?
Kidnapping people and selling them, that's a crime, isn't it?
No, it was legal then. It wasn't a crime.
Right, but today we would think that's a crime. Like that's worse than stealing a car, right? Stealing a person is worse than stealing a car.
In what way?
Well, cars they're not conscious, so you're not literally torturing a conscious entity, which is one way.
Well, I know what you mean when you said worse than stealing a car. Car is just a material thing. You're right about that. And a person is a human being. You know what I'm saying? So I do understand that. But back in those days, it just wasn't, blacks were not as screwed up as they are now. They were not, they didn't think anyone was superior to them. They didn't compare themselves to anyone else. They just lived as individuals. As a matter of fact, I had not even heard the word racism until I moved to California at the age of 18. I may have heard it somewhere in Indiana. I went to live in Indiana for a minute, and I went to a mixed school where whites and blacks were going. And I noticed that the black people hated the whites up north, but down south, it was totally different. It was amazing down south. But up north in the cities, it was hell because most of the blacks went up there and they just followed the so-called leader. You know, I got to tell you this. I want to ask you this, and I gotta run. I'm being told here. Do you agree with me? Do you agree that abortion is worse than slavery itself?
No, I think that the killing someone on its own is less bad than torturing them first and then killing them. So just abortion, just killing somebody is bad, but it's not as bad as taking someone's property, torturing them for years, and then killing them. I think that's worse.
So when they are killing the man's baby inside the woman's womb, they have to torture the baby first. They give it saline to burn it and take life out of it, or they bring it out of the body in some cases and cut the throat of it or kill it some kind of way. So they have to torture the unborn child in order to kill it.
Yes, I agree.
So how is that easier? How is that not worse than slavery?
Because starving someone, whipping someone, raping someone over the course of many, many years is a lot worse than 10 minutes of like throat slitting.
So that's crazy. And so burning them with saline solution for 3 days before you bring the baby out, that's not torturing?
That is torturing, but it's not as bad as whipping someone for years. Whipping someone for years is much more painful than saline for 3 days.
Well, what made you think that that slave owner was whooping someone for years? Where you get that from?
historical accounts of slave owners whipping their slaves.
Why you believe that crap?
Because we have the bones of the slaves that have been scarred by the whips to prove it.
Amazing. What do you think about the fact that blacks were enslaved by other blacks in Africa?
There were bad people who were black in Africa, just as there are in every country.
I gotta run, man. I got another interview coming up
Yep.
here. But it's been amazing talking to you.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. It was a great conversation. Love to talk with you again sometime.
Right. Can I have the people go to check us out?
Yep.
Go to JesseLeePeterson.com, JesseLeePeterson.com, or rebuildingtheman.com. And what we got to return to is love. We need not that emotional crap. We need real love so that we can turn America around. Thank you, man, for having me on. I totally appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on. And check out my YouTube channel, youtube.com/TJump, and I'll talk to you later.
All right. Thank you, buddy.